So, iconic anime villain groups. We've been talking a lot about them recently, but specifically in the last video that I posted on this page, where we were talking about the homunculi from Full Metal Alchemist, and guess what? This video is also about them. But in that video, I said that we're gonna be breaking our talk about the homunculi into two separate videos. Because sitting down and explaining how the homunculi work, how they were created, and what that has to do with Father, plus ranking and explaining them, would have taken 45 to 55 minutes. And while I do love giving my editor more work than he can handle, he does seem to sleep sometimes. So today we're gonna be talking about the homunculi, but not talking about how they were created or what this has to do with Father, but instead talking about how hard they punch you, and depending on how hard they punch you, where they fall into the ranking amongst each other. So therefore, since the last video was focused more on just the homunculi as an idea and Father, this video will be more focused on individual homunculi, their backstories, their powers, and their ranks. It's a Weeb Commander classic. You know how it goes, so let's get into it. But before we get into anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're feeling particularly generous, guys, go ahead and follow my brand new anime podcast that I'm doing with Danny Mata called Otaku's Anonymous, where we break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So I know what you're saying. You're saying,
Nick, all of the homunculi are created using the same technology.
and since they're all created using the same technology, they all have the same movesets and powers, so how can one be stronger than the other? And while for a lot of the homunculi, this is relatively true, as you're gonna hear me saying the words regeneration, superpower, and super speed a lot of the individual homunculi have individual powers like greed and gluttony and lust. And therefore, even though the base of every homunculi is basically the same, they have individual aspects that make them either stronger or weaker than, well, their brothers and sisters. Well, that is except for, of course, our first entry on the list, because our first entry on the list is Sloth, who doesn't have anything that makes him special. I mean, he does, but no like crazy moves like turning his skin into diamonds. See, Sloth is the embodiment of Father's sloth, and having your entire personality built around the idea that you don't want to do anything isn't exactly conducive for power, as anything you ask Sloth to do, he won't want to. In fact, the only reason he ever does anything is so he can get back to sleep. Sloth is 150 years old. He's the third youngest homunculus, and even though he might not have what some would call a unique move, he does have a lot of things going for him. Sloth is the largest homunculus, as well as the fastest homunculus. Well, actually, the largest homunculus is Envy's true form, but while they're all in human form, Sloth is the largest, so his lack of an individual move is countered with his speed and strength. However, Sloth isn't necessarily the fighter of the group. See, Sloth was actually created to dig the tunnels under Amestria to create the gigantic transmutation circle, and once these tunnels were done digging, and 5 people who tried to use human transmutation were put at the 5 points of the transmutation circle, then Amestria could be turned into a philosopher's stone. So he was never supposed to be the intelligent, wisecracking character with a cool moveset. He was supposed to be a lazy giant grunt whose entire existence could be boiled down to punching rock, and he's been doing that his entire life. For over 100 years, Sloth has been punching out tunnels under Amestria. And when he finally finished the transmutation tunnel and therefore had nothing else to do, he became Father's personal bodyguard. It's not really until chapter 91 of the manga that Sloth becomes even somewhat important to the story. Mind you, there are 108 chapters in Full Metal, when he's dispatched by Father to kill Olivier Armstrong. And it's at this point that a battle between the Armstrong siblings in Sloth breaks out. However, just when it looks like Sloth is going to be too much for the Armstrong siblings, 2 of the stronger alchemists in Amestria, mind you. Well, actually, Olivier isn't an alchemist. She just uses a sword, but she's incredibly fast and agile. And she used this speed and agility to beat her brother Alex, who is one of the best alchemists in all of Amestria, in one-on-one combat. And Sloth was gonna win against this duo. That is until Izumi Curtis and her husband Sig showed up. And we got one of the manliest muscle moments of all time between Alex Armstrong and Sig, who proceeded to launch a volley of attacks against Sloth until they threw him down on a transmuted earth spike. At which point Sloth realized that he wasn't regenerating. However, Sloth welcomed death with open arms, as even living was too much of a hassle for him. The reason that all 4 of them struggled with Sloth is that because for 100 years he has been with his bare hands digging through steel and rock, meaning that a human body to his hands is like tissue paper. Sloth has accidentally exploded human beings upon contact. Not to mention that Sloth's skin has also become incredibly hardened after a century of digging through steel and rock, to the point where bullets and rockets don't penetrate his skin, with his only weak spot being the top of his head. And not to mention, like we've already touched on, he's the fastest amongst the homunculi. But there are a lot of weaknesses, at least when it comes to the homunculi in Sloth. One, he is the slowest regenerator out of all of them, and it's believed that this is because of his sluggish nature. He's in no rush to fully regenerate. Not to mention that he's also incredibly clumsy and easily fooled. Because of this, when he uses his most powerful attack, where he runs full speed at somebody and attempts to barrel into them, he usually misses. And as somebody who's created solely to punch rocks for a century, his his intelligence is not that high, which means if he finds himself in a situation he can't punch his way out of, he's kind of screwed. Which is why when he found himself coming up against people who were almost as strong as him in Sig and Alex Armstrong, who were able to continually impose massive amounts of damage to his body that he wasn't able to regenerate fast enough, his redstone eventually ran out of energy and was no longer able to regenerate his body. So yeah, Sloth is the weakest. Next up on our list, we have Gluttony. Gluttony also isn't the smartest. Gluttony is the most childlike out of all the homunculi, which makes sense when you consider the fact that he is the second youngest homunculus. However, this childlike demeanor pretty much makes Gluttony the only homunculus who cares about his brothers and sisters, as he was happy to see Greed and was devastated when he heard about Lust's death. On top of this, Gluttony doesn't have the usual disdain for humans that the rest of the homunculi have, which is why he's a little bit lower on this list. See, so far as abilities go, Gluttony has some of the best out of any of the homunculi. But Gluttony doesn't exactly have what one would call self-awareness. See, Gluttony, as the embodiment of gluttony, simply wants to eat everything around him. And while he's admitted to liking the taste of humans, specifically women, this isn't because he hates humans, he just likes their taste. And therefore, Gluttony operates more like a cleanup specialist for the homunculi than anything, as he's the designated destroyer of evidence that the homunculi have been anywhere. So if there was a human killed by the homunculi or a building destroyed by the homunculi, he was sent there in order to eat it and get rid of it. And this is because he has unique digestive enzymes. See, his digestive enzymes give him the ability to digest anything from steel to humans in a matter of seconds. And as his sin is gluttony, it's impossible for him to satiate his hunger, meaning that Gluttony can and will eat anything, be it inorganic or organic. However, he does need to be pointed in the direction of what he should be eating. The only time that Gluttony took it upon himself to eat somebody specifically is after Colonel Mustang killed Lust. And since he has love for his homunculi brother and sisters, he wanted to take out the person who killed his sister. Now, Gluttony's most unique ability is the fact that in his stomach resides a fake gate of truth. See, Gluttony is an experiment by Father to create a new gate of truth that he could access all of the information of the universe from. However, after entering this gate of truth, which has the same eyeball as the regular gate of truth, there's just a black expanse of nothingness. And the only things you can find in this gate is not the knowledge of the universe, but everything that Gluttony has ever eaten, which, as you can imagine, since it is hundreds of humans, is nightmare fuel. But since this is a fake gate of truth that's its own pocket dimension, it's impossible to get out of. The only way to get out of this fake gate is to try human transmutation while inside the gate, and that way the real gate of truth will open and pull you into that. However, since you've entered the gate of truth through a fake gate of truth, trying human transmutation while in the fake gate of truth actually circumvents the negative effects of trying human transmutation and creates a bridge back to reality. Not to mention, since this is a gate of truth, Gluttony is also able to grab people from a distance using either his rib cage or the little black hands that come out of gates of truth to pull them into his dimension. On top of this, he's got a really good sense of smell, better than all of the homunculi. Therefore, he's kind of used as a dog for the homunculi. But Gluttony honestly has a pretty good track record for somebody who's number 7 on this list. Gluttony was able to get Edward, Ling, and Envy into his false gate. And even though Al was able to trick Gluttony into bringing him to Father's lair and was later dispatched in this same battle, when he comes back, he goes toe-to-toe with the likes of Greed and Lao Fan. And he might have been able to hold his own except for the fact that Pride thought he was dead weight and killed him. But speaking of battling Gluttony, next up on the list we have Greed. Greed is one of the more complicated and interesting homunculi. He's referred to as the ultimate shield because he has the ability to rearrange the carbon in his body. And obviously, while being able to rearrange the carbon in your body would give you the ability to do a lot of things, how Greed usually uses it is by making his skin harder than diamonds. Greed is the only one of the homunculi to openly defy and especially mock Father. See, Greed was the third of the homunculi to be created and defected from the homunculi about 100 years before the events of Full Metal, as he believed by dedicating his life to fulfilling Father's ambitions, he wouldn't get to achieve what he wanted. And Greed stays away until he's caught by King Bradley and brought back to Father, at which point Father asks him if he wants to rejoin the homunculi, to which Greed says no. So Father boils him in a pot of molten gold. However, he doesn't stay dead for long because eventually Father, after the death of Lust, realizes that he needs another soldier. So he takes Greed's redstone and offers it to Ling Yao. And Ling Yao, who wants to become the leader of Xing, realizes he needs Greed's power in order to accomplish that goal. So he allows Greed to take over his body, which means that the version of Greed that exists until the end of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is a combination of Ling Yao and Greed. And the combination of these two coming together and eventually working cohesively with each other makes him significantly more powerful. But what is so powerful about Greed? Well, of course, all of the things that make every single homunculi powerful: immortality, rapid regeneration, contamination, immunity, enhanced speed, power, durability. But Greed's real power, once again, comes from his ultimate shield, where Greed is able to turn his skin, and only his skin, into graphene. And since only his skin is prehensile graphene, everything everything else can still move like it was moving before. And since graphene is incredibly light, this doesn't weigh him down. And while usually Greed only uses this ability on part of his body, like his legs or his arms, to increase the punching power or defensive ability of said place of his body, Greed can cover his entire body in his ultimate shield, making him essentially invulnerable to physical attacks. No matter the amount of attacks, the volume, or the direction they come from, he is completely immune to all types of damage, while not hindering his speed or mobility one bit. Not to mention that he can maintain this form for as long as he needs to, as homunculi don't have energy or need sustenance or oxygen. So long as his redstone still has power, he can maintain his full ultimate shield form. And this ultimate shield form is so powerful, he was able to tank a nuclear level attack from Father point blank. However, there are weaknesses to this shield, specifically that it can be transmuted by talented alchemists, meaning that they can transmute away the graphene and make his body soft and squishy again. On top of this, Greed isn't able to harden his body and regenerate simultaneously. He has to choose one. And on top of this, Ling and Greed eventually learn to work together, with them switching who's in control of the body to make sure whoever would be most effective in that situation is in control. However, this does technically lead to Ling reseeding control of his body. And since we're talking about the power of Greed and not the power of Ling, the fact that Greed lost to Wrath and then lost in a tug-of-war of the soul to Ling kind of proves that he's not as powerful as he says he is. While in a battle against a non-alchemist, he is technically invincible. Up against an alchemist who's able to transmute away his graphene, he's just a regular homunculi. Up next, we got the baddest of all the homunculi, Lust, which I guess makes sense. Lust is probably the most sadistic out of all of the homunculi, taking pleasure in torturing her opponents. But Lust, unlike the other homunculi, really doesn't act lustfully. So far as representations of the sins that the homunculi are based off, Lust is the least representative. Instead, Lust is created to make others lust after her, as she's the manipulator of the homunculi, as she uses her good looks and slightly flirty nature to lure in people and then, kill them. Or not kill them and use them for their powers or their status to further the cause of Father. Now, Lust has all the standard abilities of the homunculi: immortality, rapid regeneration, contamination immunity, self-sustenance, and enhanced physiology. But the real reason that I'm putting her this high on this list is her individual trait, her ultimate spear. See, if Greed's ability to turn the carbon in his body into graphene is referred to as the ultimate shield, then Lust's ability to extend her fingernails into spear-like weapons is referred to as the ultimate spear. But Lust isn't just growing cat claws. Lust is able to grow her fingernails to any variable length, and these claws are able to cut through almost any surface. Not to mention that we've never seen a limit on how long these spears can grow to, meaning that anybody within eyesight is hypothetically within range for Lust. Not to mention she's able to extend and retract these nails faster than the human eye can see. Though these nails can't go through everything, Alphonse was able to slow down the progress of these nails with his suit of armor, though the nails still penetrated his suit. On top of this, Lust is shown to be one of the more intelligent of the homunculi, as in her battle against Colonel Mustang, she realized that she needed to cut the water line above Colonel Mustang to soak his transmutation glove, and that after soaking his transmutation glove, he wouldn't be able to use his fire alchemy. She then goes on to effectively win against Havoc and Colonel Mustang, piercing the latter through his stomach with her spears. The only reason that she didn't finish him off is because she destroyed his transmutation glove and figured he was gonna bleed out. However, Colonel Mustang, being Colonel Mustang, picked up Havoc's lighter and used that as the source of his fire for his alchemy, at which point he cauterized the wound that Lust gave him and stepped back out to see Lust fighting Alphonse. At which point, using Havoc's lighter as the source of his fire for his alchemy, he proceeds to light Lust on fire many times. However, even while being lit on fire and having to regenerate massive amounts of damage being incurred to her body, she makes one final lunge at Colonel Mustang, and with the last ounces of her life, gets inches away from his face with her ultimate spear, which makes Lust the first homunculus to permanently die, though dying at the hands of Colonel Mustang, not a knock against you. But speaking of Colonel Mustang, next up we got his boss, Wrath. Wrath, also known as King Bradley, is the king of Amestria. He was the last homunculus made by Father, and therefore the youngest, being only 60 years old. Father installed him as a puppet president of Amestria so he could lead Amestria into wars against the neighboring countries. However, Father, as a human-based homunculus, actually had natural aging, which allowed him to assimilate with the population of Amestria. On top of this, the Philosopher's Stone that created Wrath was only created using one soul, meaning that all of the power that we see from King Bradley actually comes from him as a human. See, King Bradley doesn't have contamination immunity or rapid regeneration or immortality. He's a human at the peak of physical conditioning, but a human. And therefore, the majority of King Bradley's powers come from the fact that he is an incredible swordsman. King Bradley is actually able to wield up to 5 blades simultaneously, only 3 short of Killer Bee. King Bradley, as a human without alchemical abilities, was able to defeat Greed, somebody he shouldn't have been able to beat at all, considering the fact that Greed is immune to physical attacks. Not to mention, how could we forget the entire scene where he took on basically the entire army of Amestria, cutting tanks in half. It is to this day one of the most badass scenes in anime ever. But King Bradley didn't only battle Greed once, he also battled against the second iteration of Greed and Fu simultaneously. And while in this battle, Buccaneer and Greed were able to injure King Bradley then went on to go fight against Scar, one of the strongest alchemists in Full Metal, and proceeds to, while severely injured, almost kill Scar twice. Eventually, Scar does get the upper hand on Bradley and he succumbs to his injuries. However, unlike all the other homunculi, King Bradley's body doesn't turn into dust, as King Bradley is a human-based homunculus. And King Bradley, whether or not he deserved it, dies at peace, thinking about his wife, who he dearly loved. But a lot of King Bradley's power came from his Ouroboros mark, which was located on his left eye, the eye that he usually wore an eye patch of. See, this Ouroboros mark isn't just a cool mark or a tattoo. For King Bradley, it was the ultimate eye. Ultimate shield, ultimate spear, ultimate eye. You're starting to see a trend here. This ultimate eye operates almost exactly like a Sharingan. This ultimate eye gives him extrasensory perception that allows him to immediately deduce the entirety of his surroundings. And therefore, being able to perfectly deduce exactly what's going on around him essentially gives him precognition, being able to understand and guess what his opponent is going to do before they've even done it. Therefore, he can perfectly adapt to all factors in a fight, allowing him to overwhelm his opponents both offensively and defensively with little effort. With just a small glance from the ultimate eye, he's able to immediately deduce the strengths, nature, and weaknesses of his opponents, which allows him to immediately formulate a perfect way to beat them. Which is why he was able to deduce that the best way to battle against somebody like Colonel Mustang would be to move faster than he could get his explosions off, which allowed King Bradley, or Wrath, to overwhelm somebody who killed two of the stronger homunculi with relative ease. Oh yeah, and did I mention he cut a tank in half? But while we're talking about people that Colonel Mustang, well, I guess at least kind of killed, next up on our list is Envy. Oh wait, no, I goofed. King Bradley was supposed to be 3, Nick, you idiot. They both fought Colonel Mustang. 1 won, 1 lost. Nick, what are we talking about here? Whatever. King Bradley's 3, Envy's 4. We're going back. But even putting Envy at number 4 isn't a knock against him. Yes, Envy is a boy, because Envy is incredibly powerful. See, Envy outside of Pride is the cruelest homunculus. Envy delights in human misery, whether it be physical or psychological, as he killed Maze Hughes and used that information against Colonel Mustang, who was Maze's best friend. He even goes so far as to brag about the Ishvalan War and how he played a hand in the death of thousands. Envy was also created in a different manner than the rest of the homunculi. See, Envy wasn't created by transmitting a human and placing a redstone in them, or simply just placing a redstone in a human like they did with King Bradley. Envy was created not from a human, but from a chimera beast created out of human souls. And therefore, while Envy usually has a human form, Envy has an actual true form, making him one of only 2 of the homunculi who have a true form, the other being Pride. Now, Envy, like all the other homunculi, has standard homunculus powers. But Envy's unique power is very powerful. It's shape-shifting. But Envy's shape-shifting ability goes far beyond your standard shape-shifting. The Envy can not only shape-shift into anyone, but anything. Animals and concepts included, so long as the thing that he's shape-shifting into doesn't exceed the size and weight of his original form, which, considering the fact that his original form is massive, that's not really that much of an issue. On top of this, Envy's shapeshifting goes even one step further beyond that. Envy can transform just parts of his body, and since he can transform into anything, that means he can transform parts of his body into things like weapons. But what's terrifying about Envy is that he exists in a universe that believes in the conservation of mass, which means that any form he takes, he's still as heavy as he is in his original form, meaning that if you were to hypothetically transform into the cell phone, he would still be, what, 10 tons? Which means that his human form is massively heavy and also incredibly strong and durable, due to the fact that it's incredibly dense. But since Envy can turn into anything, that basically means he has the powers of lust. To go even beyond this, whatever Envy shapeshifts into, he can impersonate perfectly, being able to perfectly copy the traits, personality, and voice of the person he's shapeshifting into. However, it's not perfect. People who know the person he's impersonating very well are usually able to tell it's not them. However, Envy's true strength comes from his true form, where he turns back into the chimeric monster that he was based off. And while in this form, he's as strong as he possibly can be, being able to crush rocks and steel under his massive body. Not to mention that this chimeric body is created out of the souls of humans, which Envy can manipulate for either psychological or physical damage against his opponents. However, turning into this true form only gave Colonel Mustang a bigger target. And therefore, Colonel Mustang was able to burn away Envy with all of the fury of a man who was fighting the person who killed his best friend, which left Envy in his true original parasitic form, which is roughly this big. And the only ability of this form of Envy is possession, the ability to possess either humans or homunculi that he bites. And through this ability, Envy is able to take over a mannequin soldier. And after absorbing enough of the mannequin soldiers, Envy was able to regain his original abilities. But that doesn't stop Colonel Mustang from killing him all over again. It's just this time, he's stopped. And it's revealed that after he becomes his parasitic form once again, that he's envious of human relationships. Envy, upset that Edward was feeling empathy for him, pulls out his own Philosopher's Stone and crushes it, killing him. But you know who wouldn't kill themselves are number 2 on the list, Pride, also known as Salim Bradley, King Bradley's son. Pride is the first homunculus that Father ever made, and he is the cruelest embodiment of evil amongst them. Pride is 350 years old, and he is the second in command of the homunculi, Father's right-hand man. See, Pride is the closest embodiment to Father that we get amongst the homunculi. See, Pride's actual form is a multi-eyed shadow, much like the shadow behind the Gate of Truth, which makes sense when you consider the fact that Father's true form was snatched from beyond the Gate of Truth, and therefore the body of Salim Bradley is just a container for this entity. Pride can then generate and manipulate long black tendrils from his body that he can use to attack opponents from a distance. And these long black tendrils are reminiscent of the long black tendrils that reach out of the Gate of Truth and pull those who have attempted human transmutation in. However, Pride's ability does come at a bit of a cost. Pride can only exist in a certain area. More specifically, Pride can only exist in the confines of the transmutation circle created under Amestria, and Pride can't make his long shadow tendrils if he's not currently standing in shadows. His power operates a lot like Shikamaru's, which means much like Shikamaru, if there's no shadows because it's either completely dark or completely light, he can't do anything. However, don't let that make you believe that he's not strong. He is. His body is incredibly resistant to physical damage. He got hit by a car and took next to no damage. On top of that, any shadow that he interacts with, he can watch through. That is to say that he can send his consciousness to shadows to understand exactly what's going on around them. On top of that, anything that comes into contact with his black shadow, he can manipulate and slice, with the only things being able to deflect his shadow being carbon-hardened objects, like graphene. Not to mention that if Pride consumes any living being, he gets their abilities, but also their weaknesses. A good example of this is after he consumed Gluttony, because after eating Gluttony, he got Gluttony's sense of smell, and his shadow got scary teeth. However, he also got Gluttony's hunger. And crazier than all of this maybe is that Pride is the only homunculus who doesn't die. See, Pride uses all of the power of his Philosopher's Stone. However, after his Philosopher's Stone is destroyed, he turns into a fetus-like being, and Edward just gives his body to King Bradley's wife. However, we get a check-in with Salim Bradley 2 years later, and he's grown into a regular boy. But Pride is still in there, just existing as a regular human who has no memory of being Father's original child. They didn't want to kill a kid, which is understandable. But you know who would have no qualms killing children, because he's actually killed thousands of children? The number 1 entry on our list, Father. Now, in our previous video, we covered Father's backstory, so we're not gonna do it here. If you wanna know Father's backstory, then go watch the other video. You should have watched that one first anyways, it was part 1. Oh, you didn't watch it because it was a video about plot and backstory and not about how hard somebody punchy? You should be ashamed of yourself. But if you have seen it, I love you. So how hard Father punchy? The answer is very, especially after a couple of Bud Lights. See, Father's true form before taking in Amestrian souls is a liquid-like being with a bunch of eyes. This is his evolved being, an entity that has existed beyond the necessity of a container. This form is revealed to us during his battle against Hohenheim, who was a slave from the kingdom of Xerxes who split half the souls of Xerxes with Father, though not intentionally. And for a while, we thought this was Father's strongest form. However, after absorbing roughly 50 million souls from Amestria, Father takes on a new appearance, a slightly skinnier, more muscular appearance with less eyes but more tendrils. But this isn't where Father's changes stop. See, Father, after absorbing 50 million Amestrian souls, then goes on to absorb the entity beyond the Gate of Truth. And now with the power of this entity, he's able to control the 50 million Amestrian souls in his body, which makes him look like a significantly younger version of the Hohenheim container he was using previously. And he refers to this form as the perfect being, claiming he now has the power of God. And for all intents and purposes, he's very close. He, in this form, is able to do whatever he wants, whether or not it goes against the natural order of the world or not. He can manipulate matter and energy to any extent. He can turn any matter into whatever kind of matter he wants at any scale and create force at any magnitude. So what does that mean? Well, it means if he put his hands on the ground, he could have turned the Earth into Mars if he wanted to. Being able to create force of any magnitude means he could have just turned gravity to 250 times and squished everybody on Earth like that. He goes so far as to create a miniature sun in his hand. He has, in a very monotheistic picturing of God, become God. Much in the same way that monotheistic gods are claimed to have the ability to terraform entire Earths and make the Earth that we stand on currently, he had all of these abilities. Anything he wanted to make, whether it be energy, force, or matter, he could. However, the combination of Hohenheim and basically every other alchemist in the entirety of Amestria were eventually too much for even Father. Now, this is mostly to do with the fact that Hohenheim is able to release all of the Xerxian souls in his body back into the Earth, and then while using the shadow that the moon is currently casting onto the Earth as a huge transmutation circle, is able to force all of the Amestrian souls out of Father, which makes keeping the entity that exists beyond the Gate of Truth in check in his body incredibly difficult, which leaves him vulnerable to counterattack, which is why Ed is able to go toe-to-toe with him in a battle of fisticuffs. However, his true undoing is when he absorbs Greed into his body, hoping to be able to use Greed's ultimate shield ability, but instead Greed overrides him and turns his body not into graphene, but graphite, which makes his body incredibly brittle, which gives Edward the ability to defeat him. But for a while there, he was God. So yes, he is the strongest of all of the homunculi. Kinda makes sense, considering he made them all. What do you guys think? Was anybody on this list in the wrong place? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Whew, if we had put both those videos into one, it quite literally would have killed Cody.